Each registration is unique and grants the right for the individual registered only to view this webinar. Sharing this webinar with unregistered viewers either during or after its performance violates Pharmatech Associates copyright. Next. If you have not already done so, we ask that you take time to read the Pharmatech Associates course disclaimer. You can download this presentation, including the disclaimer, from your USB education account. Please follow the instructions in your confirmation email to download the presentation. Next. Welcome to today's USB and Pharmatech webinar, the current state and truth of PCM, pharmaceutical continuous manufacturing. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Next. Presenting today's webinar is Anthony Tantuccio, a USB consultant, and Richard Steiner from Pharmatech Associates. Welcome and thank you to our instructors. I will now hand over the presentation to Mr. Tantuccio.
Oh, Mr. Steiner first. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone out there, and thank you for the introduction. And I may start with this overview to give some objections for this webinar and why Anthony and I thought that this is a good headline to talk about the current state and truth about continuous manufacturing. So continuous manufacturing is for a while now in the industry and discussed, and we are coming always over some misconceptions and old beliefs when it comes to discussions of continuous manufacturing. And this is, sometimes there are hurdles for the implementation. And Anthony and I, we know each other since a long time. Anthony, so you are well known in the industry, meanwhile also giving talks. And so I'm happy to have a practitioner with me. My journey in the equipment world and equipment business is one part, but I think it's important for this kind of a webinar to have someone from the industry practicing this technology. And so I want to give over quickly, Anthony, you a moment to introduce yourself before we are heading into the slide deck.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I've been working with you for over a decade now across different companies in the oral solid dosage space, and primarily focusing for more than 10 years now on continuous manufacturing, which I call continuous tableting. I currently work at a contract development manufacturing organization, Hovione, who's well known for spray drying, and for the past 6 or 7 years, we've really been developing our capabilities and our assets around working on continuous tableting. We have a number of units, and we'll probably talk about some of my experiences at Hovione as we go through the talk.
Yeah, and again, it's about the experience, not with just one single company, but it's a journey which we both share. And so I want to start with this picture here. I'm always curious. I bring this up in many of my presentations, meanwhile, because what you see here on this was a kind of life-changing for my professional career. About 30 years ago, I saw this, and it was basically at this time called the silver bullet for the pharma industry. So I already gave some idea how old this image is. But Anthony, any idea what is behind this one?
I think this is a continuous process, right? But it's a single unit operation, which I guess is arguable, right? If you consider the downstream parts there, 1 unit or not. We talk about continuous manufacturing today. There's a little bit of nuance of if we're talking about just a single unit operation, which is continuous, or we're actually talking about a continuous manufacturing system, right, of unit operations. I think that's an important distinction. But
this is already what basically is the background of that. So as you just mentioned, and I want to pick it up. So you see loss in weight feeders already on this one. You see a twin screw extrusion system, and then you see something which is called calendering, and then cooling. So it is actually at this time it was invented by the company Knoll AG, later part of AbbVie, Abbott AbbVie, and known as the Meltrix process. And I think they had this idea to use twin screws and polymers to basically develop and manufacture tablets in a continuous process. So there you don't see any compression machine, but you see this calendar, which is basically forming tablets right away. Yeah. I mean, this really worked for a product like Calitra. This is, I think, known for many out there. And what I found very interesting on this picture, if you look closer to it, there's no blending, yeah? Because what is in the chemical industry already practiced since 30 years and longer, you feed the ingredients straight into a twin screw, which takes in the first part not only the feeding section, but also the blending over. And the loss in weight feeders per se, delivering very precisely material into this. Then you start to melt the product, the polymer, and then you form it out and cool it. So this process was already out there in the 90s. So imagine, so we are now in 2026, and we still discuss whether continuous is applicable or not. Yeah. So but it's just a teaser. And of course, we learned then later on that continuous manufacturing for pharmaceuticals was defined slightly differently, Anthony.
as I said just before, like, you can look at this as a single unit operation or stringing a couple of different unit operations. If there's tableting at the end, yes, it could be a full system rather than just a single process.
Yeah, we come to this back later. So maybe a quick market review. So pharmaceutical market is still a huge and growing market. Yeah, so it's still growing by a compounded growth rate about 6 to 7%, whatever market study you look at. It's a $1 trillion business and keep on growing. From this, the oral solid part may not be the one with the highest sales value, because of course some other modalities are much higher in the sales value, but from the sheer volume, it's still dominating the manufacturing processes out there in the market. We talk about 70% in average, let's say. And I learned about a definition which was not so familiar to me, the defined daily dose. I think is something which the World Health Organization is used to have in their statistics. And so it's about 2.45 trillion daily defined doses delivered. So imagine that's a huge part, yeah? It's a huge segment. And then I came up with the idea and say, okay, we all know the short list of products which are known and which are reported to be based on continuous manufacturing processes. So I basically reverse engineered it. I just put it in and to see what comes out. So guess, Anthony, what is the market share in daily defined doses out there based on these continuous processes as we know them today? Just give a guess.
You want me to give a guess? Somewhere in the order of 1 billion dosages, daily dosages.
Exactly. So we talk about maybe even below 1%. That's 1.2, let's say 1.3 billion daily doses. So it's a niche. It looks like this is a niche application. If I then look to the equipment side, so some estimates here that 7 to 10 continuous manufacturing systems, as per the ICH Q13 definitions, are installed globally every year, whether this is the CDC, direct compression, or wet granulation, or dry granulation processes. it's maybe adding year by year another 0.78 billion capacity to that. So it's a niche, yeah. So this is where I think the perception comes from many saying, oh, about 15 years ago, continuous manufacturing was sold to the industry as a game changer, as a paradigm changer. I think a lot of these big words have been used, and this is why I think a lot of practitioners out there asking, yeah, where is now this big wave? And this is maybe one part of the discussion, yeah.
I think part of it, Richard, you mentioned like where is the big wave? Therapies are advertised as therapies, but the processes that make them, that are behind them, are not always public, right? So
Yeah.
just because there are a few that have advertised, right, that we know of, doesn't mean there's not a lot of continuous manufacturing going on in the background that we actually are not aware of.
I mean, I think that's one of the biggest reasons, and also it's sometimes mislabeled. Yeah. So, but we are going to talk about this as well. Food and beverage, and also the fine chemical market, to give some perspective to these numbers. I think there are traditionally areas where you see a lot of continuous manufacturing processes already. And I showed in this picture before the twin screw, which actually is coming from the chemical industry. So these processes are much more common in these segments of the industry. And you see now just in a comparison of numbers, these are by far bigger volumes. This is one of the reasons why many have the idea and the perception to say, oh, continuous is just something for big volume products, and not so much for the small volume products. It's maybe also some of the points we will discuss here in the next 45 minutes. And so I think in particular, when it comes to the fine chemicals, I think there is an unknown share of these fine chemicals also dedicated to pharmaceutical, because all the raw materials for the pharmaceuticals are kind of part of this bubble of fine chemicals in some cases. So you see, one of the first misconceptions or myth is continuous manufacturing means everything must run continuously 24/7 at best, yeah. But we see, in fact, that most of the systems are out there in the pharma applications are hybrid or semi-continuous. Would you agree on this, Anthony?
Right. No, absolutely. There's especially when you're considering film coating, that's one of the unit operations that has many different operations, whether it's batch or semi-continuous, and I'll show you what we do in a little bit.
I mean, the CDC, which is just one part, continuous direct compression, in a real sense can be continuous flow of powder going into a continuous dry blending system, which is a screw feeding a continuously operating compression machine. I think that's a kind of a core process, or what I've shown just at the beginning with the twin screw extruder, kind of a melt extrusion or melt granulation. So wherever you can see a screw pushing some material through, that's actually a continuous flow in the process engineering definition. But then, yeah, if you go to your company's application, I think everybody can see that in particular the back end, when it comes to film coating, that's a semi-continuous process, correct?
Right.
Maybe you
And
can
again,
walk us through to this picture a bit.
I can. I just want to add one point to your previous slide there. You could stay on this one, is that it's all about where you draw your system boundaries, right? In the context of ICHQ 13, right? The definition is combining unit operations in a way where material is fed at the same time good product is removed, right? And so whether that's continuous or it's discrete, right? A combination is usually employed. And in this system specifically, is for, usually smaller scale or smaller clinical size batches. We have a flexible rate of 1 to 25 kilograms per hour and a maximum hold-up mass in the system at any point in time of 2 to 3 kilograms because of the smaller blenders and the way the system is designed in such a very compact footprint. And it begins with the feeding, as you have there on the left, with a number of feeders up to 6, which dose each of the ingredients at defined rates according to the composition in the recipe. That material is then fed into 2 blenders that are in series. One does the primary mixing and another does lubrication so that we have efficient compression, which is the next step, the outlet of the second blender. We make tablets in the compression unit. And all of that is in that box there you see on the left. It's a very small footprint. From there, then the material, can be analyzed in real time. The software has material tracking capability, which is very important when you're talking about true continuous flow production, right? So you know what material went in at what time and where it is in the process, so that if you have means to measure the quality attributes in lines such as PAT for using NIR, or if or RTD, so you can monitor the concentration. When that material is removed, you need to understand how much of that material is removed, and are you removing enough of it? Is there a buffer? Because we don't want to provide out of specification product to the patients, right? So it's very important to have that material tracking and inline diversion, right, at the opportune points. You can move on to the next one. There's also, just because it's continuous doesn't mean we can't or shouldn't do at-line testing, right, which is the next step there, Richard. All the attributes, right, are measured at frequencies, right, just to verify in time that there haven't been any significant process shifts with real data, right? And that information, is digitized, and so you can have at-line testing, which really tells you about the current state or quality of the batch.
Yeah. I mean,
And
this
all
is
that is
one.
controlled. Yeah, the last point there, Richard. Sorry, the
Yeah,
coder there.
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
semi-continuous part we were talking about before.
Mhm. No, I mean, I just wanted to look at this at-line testing and inline PET testing and material tracking. I hear many times that the residence time distribution and predictive modeling is a kind of complexity and concern for some to look into this technology. But on the other hand, this is one of the big advantages, as I see, that you process and you see what's happening in real time. You see what's going on in the process. There's no surprise and no end testing. It's basically tracking the process through the entire manufacturing and production process. So what is your experience as a practitioner? So how complex is this really to set things like that up?
I mean, this is one of the huge benefits of having an actual continuous process, is knowing the residence time distribution, so that, if there is an issue with quality, you're not rejecting the entire batch, or you're not putting the entire batch on quarantine while you conduct your investigation, right? And that material is now not able to really be released to the market, right, for the patients that really need it. So, you can actually remove very surgically very small portions of the batch that may be actually have true quality issues, right? Not the entire batch. Obviously, at some point you have to cut the limit if the batch is really not properly operated. But having that is one of the main benefits. And generating an RTD, maybe it was complicated when we first started talking about continuous tableting on a more public scale, right? When the regulations weren't really mature, ICH wasn't there. ICHQ 13 wasn't published yet, but since then we're talking about over a decade now, right? People who have, companies who have deployed or investigated in continuous tableting, I don't believe they actually see RTD as a risk to development. I know we have a standardized procedure to generate it, right? In a matter of days, if not less. It's very straightforward to do, and so I don't understand why sometimes it's seen as such a challenge when the regulatory agencies have approved it already. It's not new anymore.
And then, yeah, the back end, you highlighted here a coder, which is a kind of a mini batch process then in the back end. So you can see nowadays that there's upstream. I talk upstream from the compression machine upstream, or downstream. You see here and there mini batch or hybrid solutions. What is the particular reason for that, in your opinion?
I think coding, while it is semi-continuous or mini batch, depending on when you look at it, I think in most traditional pharmaceutical tableting operations, film coating is it's more for an appearance, right? It's non-functional, right? And so the risk reward, right, in terms of making it continuous and uh, may not be as valuable as, say, or less. I guess it's more less complex than if you're doing uh, mini batch blending, right, where the content uniformity is, right, it is the fundamental quality attribute, right, before
Mm.
tableting, right? Because if you don't have good blend uniformity, you're not going to have good tablet uniformity. Whereas the film coating, yes, you need to have tablets that are film coated properly, even if you're a non-functional coat, um, but it's more forgiving, right? And
Mm.
so there is a layer of automation complexity which has been built into these machines, right? And so the more automation complexity you build in, the more that it's going to be required to train, learn, and understand in the manufacturing plant, right? And so and that's a business by business decision that has to be taken.
I mean, also recently to follow, there are continuous coating devices, meanwhile, marketed, and I think I saw also great results of those. But yeah, it depends whether you need them right away, or your whole product or production or commercial layout is maybe also centered around bigger batch coding activities. So you can combine whatever is suitable for you, and I think that's the magic of today's situation. You have the opportunity as a practitioner or as a manufacturing side to select which combination you want, and you can put this together. And then we are what is nowadays called pharmaceutical continuous manufacturing. You put unit operations together, whatever fits best for your purpose. Yeah. Um, and I mean, CDC, as we see a CDC process here, has been also considered as a kind of a game changer for the market. Everybody was looking to this maybe 10 years ago, saying we will see less and less typical granulation processes in the market as the flexibility of these continuous direct compression systems is so much wider in the process window, particularly because of the efficiency of a continuous dry blending process, that you will see more and more applications or product applications are based on solely continuous direct compression application. So I was checking out a little bit the data, and you can see, at least from the last couple of years, about 18 of these products which we know about, which have been marketed. 7 of them, so let's say around 35% indeed, based on these CDC processes. Of course, there's still a huge gray area, but you can see there's a trend. And I think we also discussed it both together. What is are granulation technologies, whether they are direct compression, dry granulation, melt granulation, wet granulation, they are maybe no more so needed than in earlier days. What is your point of view to that?
I think the nature of requiring granulation comes about from needing to use IBCs, right? Big bulk containers to transfer material into and out of each unit operation, right? To make sure that the product flows. And even within the tablet press, even more importantly, right? The material must flow into the die consistently. With the advances in in drug substance manufacturing and particle engineering, I think there's less of a risk in terms of feeding the material into the dye these days, right? And IBCs are really big, are still one of the biggest risks. And so continuous direct compression does not, continuous anything does not, if you have a truly continuous process, does not require those IBCs other than to get the raw material into the process. Once it's in the process, the unit is self-conveying in a way in many aspects, right? Feeding, blending, short transfer. So that's why CDC as a process is robust relative to direct compression in a batch process. You're not using IBCs to take material in and out where they can get stuck in the transfer chutes. There's a concern of segregation. So, and that's one of the powerful reasons why CDC, if you try it, you'll find many times that it's capable to be used instead of granulation. Not to say granulation can't be, right? There's still plenty of reasons to do granulation, right? High drug loading, smaller tablets, right? But again, it's a case-by-case basis.
I think it's a good idea for everyone out there to test the recipe they have currently and just put it to such a direct compression system. And they may wonder that in some cases this works straight ahead and without any issues even. As I used to say, when you get it through to a loss in weight feeder, and this loss in weight feeder can deal with the material, it's very likely that it goes nicely through to the dry blender into the compression machine even, yeah. So would you support my quote, or would you say, be careful?
I'm sorry, Richard. Like,
no, I said, I used to say when material is capable,
yes.
The loss in weight feeder is capable to handle the material, then most likely you will get it through the whole process without issues. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that the first time. Yes, anybody any practitioner or company that's been doing continuous manufacturing will always say all you have to do is get it to feed, right? That's probably the biggest hurdle, because it's the individual raw materials that need to get into the feeder. And once they're there, it's a matter of process development for the particular formulation, right?
Now, this is also, I think, the part where the so-called mini batch technology has their merits, and we'll pick on that. So, yeah, the first part is already about this kind of perception that continuous manufacturing must operate 24/7. I think looking to this today, it's much more a lean manufacturing exercise. So it's avoiding waste. It's being responsive in the system itself to changes quite quickly. And then it's actually a continuous improve process. It's a Kaizen principle to me. Yeah. So I'm wondering if this is much more about a lean manufacturing activity and exercise rather than just implementing a continuous process.
It's funny that you say that, and we've talked about this, when we met before. But I've done Six Sigma training many years ago, and if you were to just look at the benefits that they advertise for doing Six Sigma and Lean, and then you look at the benefits that are always stated for continuous, they're fully aligned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Continuous is a method of implementing lean manufacturing, right, at its core. And it allows you to do, for this flexibility in batch size and just-in-time manufacturing, should you do it.
Yeah, all these arguments basically will find into this lean manufacturing principle, and it's so I would say continuous manufacturing to me, or continuous processing, however you call it, is a tool in this box for practitioners, and we want to touch on this because I was highlighting this earlier. Continuous manufacturing for some only makes sense for the big blockbuster drugs. But we see also for the smaller volume of drugs this kind of application. And if somebody is coming to you, Anthony, and saying, "Oh no, it's just for big volume," what would your response to be to this kind of conception?
I mean, that's where, you know, nobody's going to argue that that's not where the highest efficiency is, right, with large volume. But every other industry that is, you know, gone into routine manufacture for a particular product, you know, uses continuous. Oil, semiconductors, right, chemistry, like these are all continuous processes because they're very efficient, right? I think there's some nuance or some confusion around when we start to go into the earlier phase of the product life cycle when batches are not routine, you're changing formulations, there's a lot of variation. It gets more challenging to say that, you know, continuous is the most effective process, right? But uh, we as a CDMO kind of, you know, develop formulations for continuous. And again, it comes down to standardization and familiarity, right? When we started our line that I showed before, you know, it was it took some time for us to get up to speed, to develop the workflows, standardize the processes, train the people. But now, you know, we do our work in the lab and get to GMP in a matter of a month, right? And then it's just a matter of you know, having those skill sets and workflows executed in the GMP environment.
Yeah, and this is if you buy such a system, this is like with a race car, you know, you have to drive it on a race course, and then you have to tweak it, and you have to make use of that. And so, I think the point of whether a large volume or small volume, orphan drugs, etc., this has all to do with the business case, and the business case has to do in which space is your company actually. Are you part of the innovator group? Looking into that, where the early adapters all came from. Of course, they had different perspective to that. They had a different idea to implementing it. It was maybe a supply chain optimization. It was a time to market case. It was all driven by new products out of their pipeline. CDMOs, CRDMOs, I think that's something which is your company belonging to. Of course, you guys follow your customers, but then it's about tech transfer, clinical supply, and scale out, one of the business drivers. Going to the other side, I think the next group, the generics and the OTCs, you saw at the beginning not so many implementing this technology, but now they are coming as well. And I heard people saying, "Oh, generics, you know, the gross margin is so slow, it doesn't make sense for generics." No, you will wonder. There are products out there where this perfectly makes sense because you have cost savings, you can drive your productivity, or if you look to life cycle extension. So there's not one argument and no one singular business case to justify continuous. You have to see each of these segments individually and each company even, because finally it comes down to your competitiveness and to the competitive rivalry in this industry. So you have to see, and this is why you hear so little sometimes from companies using this technology. They found out now after a while that this can be a competitive edge to have this technology, and so they are not so prominent in describing it anymore. And we go into kind of business case assessments all the time, but maybe let's look into time scale, and I think that's one of the mostly used business cases for innovators. And so saying, how can we improve the time to market? Maybe you can elaborate on that from your knowledge.
Yep, no, thanks, Richard. And you know, one thing I failed to say in the previous point was, you know, continuous manufacturing systems are very agile, right? So when you think about development in the clinical space, as you scale up, you also scale your DOEs, right? Or you know, when something happens. So and you know, I guess this is the perfect slide to demonstrate that, right? In the standard process, batch process, even, right, you have a longer runway, right, to reach your clinical milestones, right? And so formulation and process modification is relatively low risk, right? And you know, there's still always going to be that scale up and transfer risk as you get towards later stages and eventual launch, right? So the scale up and transfer from one site to another is always a risk, right? You'll never you know, be able to to get rid of that, based on experience. So you can go to the next one. The real benefit, or also the risk in batch when accelerating, for accelerated programs, right, is that you need to, you have to get your clinical data early, and so you may do that in an unoptimized final dose, whether it's capsules or maybe multiple dosages of tablets. And so after proof of concept, there may be additional work on the formulation or even the process where scaling up will be compounded risks, right? And maybe even have to do additional bioequivalence studies, which are always even more of a risk. So while accelerated findings can get to market faster in theory, it adds a lot of risk post clinical proof of concept. Where continuous can really help there, and de-risk that that end state, is that it's very agile in early development. You might have to do a little bit more work up front, and by work I mean flesh out the design space, but the equipment and the capability is very agile. So you can do multiple dosages or multiple forms in a single campaign, right? With using very little material. And what that does is that once you achieve your proof of concept, you're still using that same process. You're not scaling up, right? If you have, either you could use the same equipment and just run longer for the target batch size, or you have an equipment that's identical to it in another site, right? But the scale-up risk is essentially, negligible at that point, right? And it's really just a matter of transfer. So, and again, this is all part of the CMC strategy that has to be built, right? And I think that is a lot of the that may be where a lot of the inhibition of taking on continuous lies, right? It has to be figured out. Many practitioners have figured it out, right? What works for them. But there's a lot of internal friction still that has to be overcome.
Thanks for providing us a look over the shoulders to see where the savings can be found. And I think this ties into what I will share next, is what is the business case behind that. Yeah, this is one of the things which we are working quite intensively with customers, defining the business case. So just a quick a few slides with graphics. So BA means batch process. So you have now the case, you have a new product coming, you have a batch equipment, you have a typical batch process infrastructure. So you know what you're doing. This is most likely the sales curve of your product to expect. Yes, you have the growth period of the product, you grow your sales, and then the back end, the fade out, of course, the sales numbers might go down. How will this look like now for having a continuous system, and you develop the process, the product on a continuous? This is more likely to be this, because you have a much faster way to the market. And even if we talk about maybe a few months can make the difference. There are studies out there from McKinsey and companies who say what if you are earlier to the market, of even about 4 to 6 months, your peak sales will be 12% higher, and your market share will be 12% higher, and your peak sales in correspondence to that. So you see, the typical sales curve will look differently. You will ride the wave much faster because you have not the typical scale-up work to do. You can not necessarily to ramp up or scale out your product. You can faster supply the market. And we have a prominent case out there, the product Trikafta from Vertex, which they claimed they did it in 3.5 years to the market. And so it shows that you can grow the volume dramatically, and the success of your company. Just translating this now into a net present value will then look like this graph. So you have the years of depreciation, of use of the equipment. So you use your existing batch equipment, the net present value will be fine too. But again, you have a higher market share to expect. You are faster on the market, which means you have a higher cash intake quickly, and you can ride the wave longer. So here the net present value over the whole entire product lifetime will be dramatically higher than using your batch system. And that's something the lock-in of the manufacturing platform is in many cases underestimated in the business success. I showed you this melt extrusion system early on. So one of the key success factors of this company, Abbott AbbVie, with their Calitra product, was exactly that they could really make advantage of the early platform decision during the entire life cycle of the process. Before then, of course, generic products kicked in or new developed products came on. So what is the time of the life cycle which you can make use the earnings in this time? This is the dramatic difference if you calculate a business case. So a business case is not a return on investment for a singular year. That's actually, you have to discount this over the lifetime of the product and the equipment. And here you can see why it is so tremendously important to make a really early on platform decision, not in the phase 2 or 3, but if you can, even earlier. Going into the direct comparison between a batch process and a continuous process, you hear frequently the acronym OEE, so the overall equipment effectiveness. That's another element. So with a continuous process, as we highlighted earlier on, you will, as this is a continuous, basically flow, you interact with inline data, you interact with the process to eliminate any kind of waste. The immediate interaction of the process makes the difference to a batch process. You don't test the quality afterwards, you test it while you are manufacturing the product. This gives you overall also a higher OEE. Of course, continuous manufacturing equipment and all the efforts you have to put in to implement this technology will be more costly. But hopefully you will also run these continuous processes much more efficiently than your batch equipment. So I'm also known for this statement saying, if you operate your continuous manufacturing equipment in the same OEE level than your batch system, most likely you will lose money. Yeah. So you have to challenge the entire team and structure of your organization to adapt to this and to make much more use of this equipment and to really get the full benefits of continuous manufacturing. So that's a part of the whole equation, which is not so frequently looked at, but it ties back into the lean manufacturing paradigm and into what we call Six Sigma principles. So maybe some take from you, Anthony, to this point. How is your company dealing with the operational implementation of this kind of technology?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the statement you said earlier about, if you have a Ferrari, you're not going to drive it down, a street in 25 miles an hour, right? But you need to have a team built to operate these lines continuously, right? Even though the lines do operate mostly on their own, right? They take samples. There's a lot of information that's generated, right? There's a lot of, GMP aspects that have to still be addressed, right? We have to qualify a batch, or it has to be released. Rooms have to be set up. So it's not just about the equipment, it's about the environment the equipment resides in, right? And so those procedures, right? The way QA investigates deviations, the amount of samples we have to take or not, depending on where we are in the life cycle, all those things are very important factors that need to be addressed when having a line, especially in the early development phase, right? You mentioned before. To be agile, we have to have, digitalization. We have to, make sure that we have the means to skill to teach our, technicians and operators new skills. All of that's required in order to unleash, right, the efficiency that continuous can provide. and we've learned that, on through our own years of developing the process and running for clients.
Yeah, of course, you have to have the team set up in a way to keep the race car going. Yeah, this is for sure. But it all ties into another kind of another parameter you hear frequently in the chemical industry is process capability. Yeah, but this is all related to the OEE and to the idea to have zero waste. And back here we are again in the lean manufacturing principles. And so I think that's very important to highlight. Regulatories are perceived as well as some of the let's say, or some are concerned about the regulatories. And we know that FDA is pushing since many years this technology. Also EMA and PMDA, they are all kind of accepting that. And if I look to the ICHQ13, I think, Anthony, you see that many countries have meanwhile harmonized the ICHQ13 guideline.
Yeah,
So,
again,
yeah.
Richard, this has been, these processes, continuous manufacturing, especially for oral solid doses, but even drug substance and biologic, they haven't just arrived to the scene, right, where regulators are approved. This has been going on for more than a decade already. Many have paved the way. Some of the names you mentioned earlier, have done that deliberation with the regulatory authorities. They've implemented, the guidances in ICHQ 13. I invite anybody who has doubts to go. There's a nice article by ISPE that I think practitioners from Eli Lilly and Janssen, or now Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicines, talk about their story about bringing these products globally, right? I think it's often a reason to defer making a decision on continuous or batch, right? Because if you haven't done it yet, right? I really don't think I think this is a verifiable myth these days.
But when it comes to regulatories, I think it's interesting to see what they are most likely interested in and looking at. And we will talk about control strategy later on. Sorry for jumping around here, but I think besides the quality, the consistency of the quality of a product, the control strategy is something which is of particular interest. And I think that's something I want to highlight. Yeah. Of course, we hear all the time the question how to define a batch, etc., how to bridge from batch to continuous. But when it really comes to the point of discussions with regulatories, I think the control strategy is one of the key elements to look at. Would you agree on that?
Absolutely, it's the way that we assure not just the regulatory agencies, but it's our, almost like our contract with the patient that we're going to provide quality medicine. So the control strategy is the foundation of that.
Now, this is basically the last part of our session here, saying let's talk about this control strategy element a little bit. I do not want to repeat all the time the definition of control strategy, but we see this pyramid quite frequently. And so I was wondering if you could give us some insights how your company and your team is defining that and using this control strategy element in your implementation.
Yeah, I think the pyramid you see there is put out back in 2014. We were just trying to identify, right, what is the control strategy in general, and how do you apply that to continuous manufacturing? I think one of the misconceptions is that we think about continuous manufacturing in a static way, that it's only commercial and everything's free. But the truth is, there is a development life cycle before you even get to launch, right? And the way that development life cycle is executed, the type of data you generate, or the type of data you miss, right? That all is going to contribute to your eventual control strategy that's going to be required by the time at launch, right? And so in the earlier phases of product and process development, right? When, maybe even before clinical trial proof of concept, the control strategy is the same as batch, right? We're looking at limits on parameters. We might have operators like really, keeping parameters very tight. API variability is scrutinized, and we have traditional sampling and testing, right, by QA/QC. And because you haven't developed the methods, you don't understand the full design space yet. You can't possibly put advanced control strategies at that stage. And the batches are small, right? So it's more amenable to that type of control strategy. But right, that is the foundation. With all of that effort, you develop knowledge, right? And you start to develop the methods, and you run the experiments to calibrate and validate the method. Even if they're not used for full control, they could be used for inline monitoring, right? And that's part of the adoption of QBD. You understand your design space, right? And so level 2 strategies, especially for continuous, where you might divert, right, portions of your batch, right, but not necessarily have a full real-time release. Maybe there are aspects of real-time release. But again, that is also, develops another layer towards a more holistic, digitized, modern, quality management system, right, with true full integration, where we could start predicting changes just based on the raw materials, or by changes in the process parameters. We have model predictive control, and not all processes need that level of control, to be honest, right? A simple CDT process may be fine with the level 2 control strategy. When you start to get to continuous granulation technology, there might be more opportunities to have this more advanced process control, right? And so control strategies do evolve throughout the life cycle, and how you apply them is part of how you can be more or less efficient with implementing continuous manufacturing.
Yeah, some even struggle with this term control strategy, and mix that up with controls and automation strategies. But I think that's really very important to say that it's product related. Here it's about the development from the early stage into the final commercial stage. And with that, you define and develop further your control strategy for the product. And that's core and center for regulators. They want to see how this will work. Yeah. And I will go back to this platform decision. So in the early stages of your product life cycle, this platform decision is already very important to make, because you can have a lot of hidden costs if you do it in a wrong way. And I quickly put this slide together saying you have high long-term cost of goods. It can have some impact on your commercial space. It can have also impacts on late process redesigns, complex scale-up and tech transfer strategies. So there's, in the whole life cycle of a product, you can lose a lot of money if you don't do this wisely from the beginning. Yeah? And I think, Anthony, you may have seen also cases where this went into a difficult pathway down the life cycle of a product.
I think this is one of the key reasons why, one of the key struggles and decision points of why organizations can't make the switch to continuous, because their development is built around, fixed platforms that are based in batch, right? And so once you generate that proof of concept data, it's very risky, and to change platforms, even evaluate continuous. So.
I mean, nowadays technologies give us the chance to make also much more prediction here. Yeah? So I think it's one of the uncomfortable realities, I called it, that you sometimes see that very early on in the feasibility already the platform or processes are fixed for some. Yeah, but what means scientifically logical is not always logical for the strategy later. So whatever you choose in the first 10, 15 years of the life cycle of a product will have impact on your net present value. This is what I was showing earlier. And you give up on that. But maybe by not doing so much empirical anymore, predictive tools nowadays, predictive modeling can help in your CMC process. And I think I would say better stop guessing in your CMC process, but do predictive model in your life cycle prediction. Yeah. And so, yeah, you have a lot of predictive technologies available, and I'm sure you guys, Anthony, you also use modeling quite intensively already.
Yeah, it's one of the fundamental data that's generated even before we get to the GMP environment, right? As mentioned before, you need to have the systems, the tools, and the procedures in place. So, we do as much development in our lab outside of GMP space as possible, right, to get the process ready. And part of that, a big part of that is getting this representative data and feeding it through our models, right, to understand the risks for
Yeah.
RTD, for operation, before even getting into the GMP space.
I think final thoughts on that. I just mentioned predict it, model it, and then build it. This would be a kind of a slogan I want to pound out here. Yeah? So with not only looking to continuous manufacturing as one implementation route, no, use it, see it as one of the tools you have on hand to come to a lean manufacturing. And I think that's one of the points where I would like to conclude this webinar by saying, maybe we should call it integrated manufacturing, Anthony. What is your thought on this term?
I've always said that, if you look at the continuous systems out there, none of them are truly end-to-end continuous, right? And where do you draw the boundary, right? Do I need to integrate drug substance? Do I need to integrate packaging, right? So I think, talking about hybrid systems and in general, integrated manufacturing is probably a better fit than continuous manufacturing because there's so much drama around saying that sometimes.
Yeah, I'm afraid. I mean, Anthony, I could talk with you together for another hour about this topic. I know, unfortunately, we ran out of time already, and I would like to give the audience at least a little chance to put some questions forward to us. So I think let's conclude this here with the integrated manufacturing, and we thank you all for your attention. Concluding with this picture from the beginning. Now Anthony and I are curious about your questions. Okay. Should I go ahead already? Okay, good. Then what is actually the advantage of a fully continuous flow regime towards a mini batch solution? Oh, maybe Anthony, that's also some for you, but I would reply in, I think the feedback, the fastness of the process is one big advantage towards any kind of a mini batch solution. So you see on a real continuous flow regime that's usually reacting much faster to modifications of the critical process parameters and to adapt much quicker to changes of raw material characteristics, for example. This is something which just come up to my mind. Any thoughts, Anthony, to this point?
I don't, I guess the advantage of continuous versus the mini batch that, in mini batch, it's still batch, right? And so you're still designing, your process around avoiding segregation the best you can, but it's not something that will necessarily go away. You'll have to formulate it out. Whereas continuous direct compression systems have shown, extreme robustness to any kind of segregation potential at all, right? So, and again, I think you're right. As I think there's a little bit more of a dependency on throughput, right? The way feeders operate are different, right? They operate to a defined amount, and so can they control that defined amount as you go to higher throughputs? Sure, I guess if you have different feeders, or it has to be engineered. So it's just a different kind of trade-off.
So what are some of the features that benefit to develop speed and speed to market? Maybe once again, Anthony, this is something for you, I guess.
I mean, I think I alluded to it, if didn't say it outright earlier, is, the extreme amount of information that can be generated in development in a very short amount of time with the continuous manufacturing is very much superior to batch, right? Especially as you
Mm.
get to later stages. In batch, in phase 3, if you have all of a sudden you do a scale up and you find that your design space isn't appropriate, or for whatever reason you need to do another DOE, you're doing full scale batches just to get one data point. Whereas continuous,
Mm.
you're just stepping along the way, changing the set points to get to the desired point you need, using very little material, right? Let alone not needing to scale that up from one phase to another.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of agility in continuous tabling, which enables the speed to market.